It is just hitting me, and maybe because the weather is finally beginning to feel fallish here in Houston, but the fact that we are 2 weeks out from Halloween. So hopefully you have already started getting your kids Halloween costumes or stocking up on candy or however your family chooses to celebrate. But that said, with all the habitual preparations we often do as parents to get our kids and our families and our homes ready for trick-or-treating, trunk-or-treating, however you choose to spend the holiday, I know a lot of us are kind of avoiding the real issue at hand. And that is, how do we handle this season of such excessive amounts of candy when it comes to feeding our kids and raising kids who have a healthy relationship with all foods? And that's why over the next 2 weeks, I am going to be airing 2 episodes a week. Some of these may seem familiar from last year if you've been a longtime listener, but a lot of my advice and my position on how to approach Halloween hasn't changed. And part of that is because, yes, I would consider myself a more seasoned mom, so going through Halloween is much more familiar to me now as my kids are a little bit older. But even more so, as I continue to work with hundreds of families each year, I continue to see that this really is the best practice application of evidence-based advice, both on raising healthy eaters who have well-balanced diets full of variety and nourishing foods, but also who form healthy relationships with food, who don't exhibit disordered eating habits. So if you feel like you're going into the upcoming couple weeks needing a roadmap, needing expert advice, and needing just some of that reassurance on how do we handle all this candy while still being cognizant and mindful of wanting to raise healthy kids, I want you to make sure that you're following the Veggies and Virtue Show, that you get my newsletter so you know each and every week when these episodes are released. You can expect on Mondays and Wednesdays for there to be new, actionable, yet really easy to digest episodes airing to set your family up for success this Halloween season. Hey Mama, I'm Ashley, and welcome to the Veggies and Virtue podcast. In this podcast, you will find simple menu ideas, kitchen organizational systems spelled out for mom life, and feeding tips and tricks that are both evidence-based and grace-laced. I believe that you can find flexibility when it comes to feeding your family so that you can feel calm, capable, and connected in the kitchen. As a registered dietitian and Christian mom of 3 myself, I want you to break free from the mealtime battles and to feel equipped while feeding your kids all day long. Pull up a stool at my kitchen counter and let me pour you a cup of coffee and say a quick prayer for you. It's time to chat about the mealtimes, messes, moments, and ministry of motherhood. All right, walk through this picture with me for a minute. You're going to probably wonder where the heck I'm going with this, but just track with me for a second. Because I'm wondering if any of you, particularly those of you with dogs, have ever gone outside in the dark and say you need to go get something that maybe the kids left out in the yard, maybe their water bottle for school the next day, or their shoes, or whatever it might be. You just need to go out in the yard at dark. And as you're walking through the yard, I almost can't even say this without like physically doing the movement. So if you have a dog, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But you're just kind of hopping around, hoping that you're not going to step in a landmine on your dog's poop. And yes, I just went there with you on this episode. So forgive me if I just introduced more potty talk into your car while you're waiting in the carpool line or whenever it might be, because it's not the point. But I am going to use a few references here, but I promise it doesn't get beyond the PG word of food. But beyond that, I want you to think about this, because every time that I have done this very thing, I feel like what I'm trying to do is dodge an issue. It isn't because there aren't actually plenty of issues. There aren't actually plenty of piles of poop that my kids do actually need to pick up. The problem is that I don't have the vision or the path to safely walk through my yard in the dark. And so what happens is I do this funny little hop dance where I'm trying to only really have my big toes touch down just in case one of them lands in an, unsuspecting pile of something I don't want to stick my foot in. And so what happens is I begin concentrating more of my attention on avoiding that sensation, that feeling of my foot landing in that nasty pile of dog poop than I do on the way the moon looks at night, the way fresh grass does feel on my, the way the wind sounds as it blows through the trees and the leaves fall, because I get so stuck on focusing on avoiding that adverse outcome that I miss it. I miss it all. And in case you've never listened to the show before, welcome.
I'm Ashley Smith, and I'm a pediatric dietitian. And this example is what I think of when I think of families entering into the month of October. Because what I see is that we all begin just walking blindly through the month. And we know that the month holds dozens, if not more, landmines. It's the perpetual being booed by our neighbors on a Thursday. And then there's a class costume party on Friday. And on Saturday, we're going to a cookie decorating party. And on Sunday, there's a trunk or treat at church. And then, oh, happy Halloween. It's on a Monday this year. And so it feels like we just can't escape or avoid this candy explosion that takes over during the month of October. And so rather than coming up with a plan and having an actual vision for how we want to navigate the course of the calendar and the reality of candy being around us and our kids, we all just try our best to dance around the sugar as if we're running through the yard trying to avoid stepping in dog poop. And it's almost as if we think if we just close our eyes and pretend that these potential challenges, issues don't exist, that we won't step in them, that we won't fall into these traps, that we won't struggle with these things. But I can tell you from working with so many families that we all have to get these thoughts under control. We all have to address what is our plan. Because while we might be able to run through the yard every once in a while that way, or walk through October or a few of the events in October without a plan and without perspective on how we as a family want to handle Halloween and candy and sweets and treats and everything like that, you can't do that forever. That's not a strategy. That's not a plan. That's literally running through your yard doing a funny dance your neighbor would look at, hoping to not end up in a pile of you know what. And so I just want us to go into this month realizing that we need more. We need more than just a haphazard approach where we just hope for the best. And what I want to warn you about is we miss it. We miss it. We miss all the sweet aspects of Halloween. We miss the kids squealing from door to door as they go trick-or-treating the night of because we're already calculating how much candy had they already had. We miss the opportunity to just kneel down next to them in their little classroom and put copious amounts of orange-colored frosting on the sugar cookie with them because we're thinking they do not need more sugar. And we miss these little moments that are so valuable to kids because we can't stop thinking about the sugar. And the sugar is the evil that we're out to get. And we're not seeing that Halloween in the month of October is an opportunity. It is not only a sweet opportunity for us as moms to just relish in the stage that our kids are at and to get to be that person who does Halloween with them and who hasn't yet been replaced by other social events and other friends who they're going to trick or treat with and that. But we get to be this person in their life right now, and we get to show them how to enjoy candy, how to enjoy sugar, how to self-regulate, how to decide if this candy is really something we enjoy and want to eat or could kind of care less about. How to include these aspects of life that are real life. Because what we don't want to do is to shelter our kids so much or to restrict them so far that we're missing not only these sweet and sentimental and sacred moments with our children as moms, but we're missing these moments that are so impressionable in these little bodies and in these growing habits of how they're going to eat and how they're going to perceive sweets and treats and things like that for the rest of their life. But none of us are doing what needs to be done and coming up with a plan that doesn't end us in that pile of poo. We're just hoping for the best. And we're running through all the holiday and the Halloween festivities, hoping that's not the end result. So while this episode, and really none of my episodes, are going to touch on whether you believe we should celebrate Halloween or whether you believe we shouldn't, I believe that's a personal choice. And as a Christian and within the Christian community, I know that it's one that is often debated on which way to go. And so that's not something that I'm going to cover or dive into here on the show. I'm happy to talk about it with you privately. If you'd like to email me or message me, happy to talk about that somewhere else. But for the purpose of this show, and the purpose of this upcoming month, what my hope and my goal is, I will be able to show you how to handle each and every situation that's going to come up as it pertains to candy and added sugar, and those situations that we just feel like are very sticky because we don't know how to avoid the inevitable. We don't know how to avoid that landmine and stepping on it, that our kid is either a total wreck because all they've had is sugar, or the fear that we have that we're trying to balance out tolerating and allowing a certain amount of sugar and setting up that food neutrality and making sure that our kids do have healthy relationships with all foods, and yet still making it feel to us as moms that their sugar intake is in an age-appropriate amount of moderation, or that we're wondering how to handle these kinds of situations when we're around a lot of other families and a lot of other parents and people who may feed their families differently. They may approach sugar differently than us. They may be really liberal and allow complete free-for-all all the time, or they may be really strict and rigid and really absorbed in more of a diet culture type of thinking. And we want to be careful to not project that on our kids. There are so many adverse things that we can be fixating our attention on as we enter in October that ultimately take us away from what matters, take us away from the moments that we want to look back on, take us away from the memories that we're building with our kids in the years where we get to do it. We get to be the ones who are the first ones to see them in their costume. And let's be real, we're the ones helping them get into their costumes. But we are their friends of choice at this age and stage for most of us. I know some of you have a little bit older kids, and so the scarcity of time there in enjoying Halloween with your kids is even more limited and even more precious and sacred. But in these early years that we're so worried about each and every morsel that they're eating and putting in their bodies, we risk also missing the moments that, as a mom and a mom of 3 and a mom who has definitely played food cop around Halloween more than I would like to admit in my early years, my hope and my prayer is that this series in October is going to spare you from some of that. And even more so, generationally, it's going to spare your kids from some of that dialogue and those opinions and the actions that are ultimately doing more to harm than to help them when it comes to building a healthy relationship with food. So what do we need to do in order to prepare for this month? First, what I want you to do is make sure you are subscribed to the Veggies and Virtue podcast. This is a simple way that you'll know each time an episode is up. All you have to do to subscribe is tap on the 3 little dots that are on the top right of the Apple Podcast player. And so you'll tap on it. It'll give you a drop down of options, and you just tap that first option where it says follow show. And then when you look at your library within Apple Podcasts, the Veggies and Virtue show will show up there, and it'll show you any episodes that you've either recently missed or want to catch up on. Next, number 2 thing I want you to do is make sure that you get my weekly newsletters. The main reason for this is then you're aware of when the episodes go live, but you're also the first to know when other upcoming events are happening. So in order to get on my emails so that you know all that kind of information and you know when each of these October episodes goes live, you can go to veggiesandvirtue.com/join. Third one I want you to do is to share this episode with a friend. As I mentioned on Apple Podcast, you can just tap the 3 little dots and follow the show, but you can also click to share the show or to copy the link and pass it out to a friend via text or something like that, or put it on your social if you so choose. But I want you to think about that, especially as we go into the Halloween season and thereafter the holiday season, because our schedules are saturated with social events. And I want you to think about building up that support system that you have and how you approach feeding your kids. Because if the Veggies and Virtue community is something that aligns with you and your family values, the best way to ensure that you are helping support your child to be raised with healthy habits and ultimately to be surrounded by people who also help shape a healthy relationship with food and healthy eating patterns in their life is to get on the same page as them. And the easiest way for you to do that, rather than saying, oh, hey, this random girl I listened to on podcast, just send them a link to this show, send them a link to this episode and talk about how together you guys can listen to this series in October about how to handle things with Halloween. Or as conversations and questions come up with you and friends or you and family about all the sugar and, is food dye toxic? And is your kid really acting crazy when they only eat Reese's peanut butter cups for an afternoon snack? And all the things that might just come up as a part of mom life, share the show or send them this link so that you guys can have an evidence-based but grace-laced approach to how to handle things like sweets and treats with not only your own kids, but with one another's kids as you create a village around your families. The fourth and final thing, which I would kind of say is more of like a bonus step, if you so choose, if questions do come up for you, or if even as I've been talking today, something immediately just kind of like came to mind, or you kind of had that stirring in your spirit where you're like, I just wish I could ask Ashley, fill in the blank, whatever that might be, please know that you can always send me your voice memos at veggiesandvirtue.com/ask, ASK. That's all you have to do. Just go. You can leave me a 1-minute voice memo saying, Ashley, I'm wondering about this. Ashley, I'm worried about this. Ashley, we have this event coming up. I don't know how we're going to handle it. It feels like I'm dodging a landmine about poop. What do I do? Let me know. Send it in to me. I'd love to answer it and make sure that we get you equipped so that you and your family do have a plan of how to go about Halloween and how to approach this month. And so make sure that you're turning back in when we dive into this, not so high level as today's episode, but instead we begin to walk through what that blueprint is and what that plan is for you to avoid that awkward dance in the dark of trying to avoid piles of dog poop, but instead so that you have a plan going into the holiday and also the Halloween season that you feel confident trying out, and ultimately that doesn't make you distracted from enjoying all the sweet moments that you do have in the month ahead with your little ones.
It has been a joy having you on the podcast today. And if you've enjoyed it as well, I have a quick favor to ask. Do you mind hopping over to Apple Podcasts and leaving me a written review? This will only take you a hot second, but it truly blesses me every time I get to read what one of you write over there, and it allows me to bless others through this podcast and the episodes to come. The other thing that you can do is to take a screenshot of this episode and tag me over on Instagram at veggiesandvirtue. I would love to see what action steps that you're taking from this episode, and also to support your family in the journey moving forward. Until next time, thanks for coming over to chat at my kitchen counter. Remember that you will always have a seat and a snack waiting for you here.